Hello, everybody. This is your Uncle Navi, rereading Chapter 4 of The Ship Who Sang, also called Dramatic Mission. And it is worth pointing out, now that it is fall-y weather, we have candy corn pumpkins. They are in season. They are ripe. Meanwhile, little mischief maker over here, in a single evening, has tried to walk into traffic, eat a pair of pants, and munch on the carpet. Mischief maker. Shouldn't have eaten that at the beginning of the recording. So, Helva turned the sound down, pleased that all of the embryo tube racks and the great beakers of nutrients were being pulled out, but not at all pleased with the mauling the crewmen were giving her in the process. They didn't really need to add to the scars already made by the metal frames on her decks, nor the stains of spilled nutrients on her bulkheads. But she was silent because even the pilot's cabin showed unmistakable marks of long tenure, and Kira Fadernova had been a tidy person. However, Helva had no wish to go to Regulus and show this shoddy interior to whichever Bronze were waiting to team up with her. She said as much to the other brain ship sitting near to her on the side of the commercial pads at the Nekar spaceport. "That's a silly waste of credit, Helva," Amon, the TA-618, replied, his voice slightly peevish. "How do you know your new Brawn will like your taste? Let him, or her, pay for it on his own quarters allowance. Really, Helva, use some sense or you'll never buy free, and I don't see why you're so eager to be saddled with another Brawn anyway." "I like people." Amon made a rude noise. Since he'd landed, he had steadily complained to her about his mobile partner's deficiencies and shortcomings. Helva had reminded herself that Amon and Trace had been together over 15 standard years, and that was said to be the most difficult period of any long association. "When you've had a series of Bronze aboard you as long as I have, you won't be so philanthropic. And when you know what your Brawn is going to say before he says it, then you'll have a little idea of the strain I'm under. Kirifanova and I were 3 years of this historic run." "Oh, doesn't signify. You knew it was a short-term assignment. You could put up with anything on that basis. It's the inescapable knowledge that you've got to go on and on, 25 to 30 years worth." "Well, if he's all that bad, ought to change," Helva said. "And add a cancellation penalty to what I'm already trying to pay." "Oh, I forgot." Her reply, Helva realized, the moment the words were out of her mouth, was not very politic. Among his many grievances with the galaxy at large, the extortionate price of repairs and maintenance made by outworld stations ranked high. Amon had run afoul of a space debris storm, and the damage had required a replating of half of his nose. Central Worlds had insisted that the cause was his negligence, so it was therefore not a service incurred nor compensable accident. "Furthermore, if I opted," Amon went on sourly, "I'd have to take whoever is up next for assignment with no refusal right." "That's too true. I'm not fat with double bonuses from grateful Nekarese." Helva swallowed a fast retort to such an unfair remark, and meekly said that she hoped that things would soon look up. Amon wanted a sympathetic listener, not an advisor. Which, to be fair, is one of my many life's challenges. I need to learn when people need to just want to vent, or when people want solutions, or when they just want to complain, in the words of another. "You take the advice of one who's been around, Helva," Amon went on, mollified by her contrition, "and take every solo assignment you can get. Rack up bonuses while you can. Then you'll be in a position to bargain. I'm not. Here he comes." Oh, he's in a hurry, too. I wonder what lit his jets. Ammon sounded so disagreeable that Helva began to wonder just how much the Brawn was at fault. Brain ships were people, too. Just then, Helva could hear the Brawn's excited greeting over the open ship-to-ship band. "Ammon men, get us cleared and lifted. We've got to get back to Regulus base on the double. I just heard." And the band went dead. Oh, it was so like Ammon to be selfish with good news, too, that Helva did not take offense. Good luck to him, she thought, as she turned on the outside scanners and watched him lift off. If he did get a good assignment and the delivery bonus, he could pay off his debt. He might even resolve most of his problems with his brawn. The man had seemed nice enough when he'd paid a courtesy call on Kira and herself the day that they had arrived on Nakar. But it was petty of him, Helva thought. If the Brawn had heard, the news could not have come via type beam. Nakar Control, X-Ray Hotel 834 calling. "Helva, I had my hand on the switch to call you. Our ground crew treating you right? Anything you want them to do, you just let them know," answered the affable, calm man. Considering Nakar's recent disaster, you'd think they would be as sour as Ammon. "I was wondering if you could tell me why the Tango Alpha 618 left in such a hurry." "Oh, say, yes, that is something, isn't it? Never know who's around in the next system over, do you? I always said a galaxy's got room for all kinds, but who'd ever think people, I guess you could call them people, would want any old archaic plays? Can you imagine that?" And infuriatingly, the calm man chuckled. Ammon had problems knowing ahead of time what his man would say. Helva thought, impatiently waiting for this jovial soul to say anything worth listening to. "Well, not really, because you haven't told me what you'd heard yet." Helva cut in as the man seemed likely to continue editorializing. "Oh, sorry. Thought you ships would have all of your ears... Oh, well, pardon the slip. To the rumor block. Well, now, generally my sources are very reliable, and this came to me from two sources. As I was telling Pilot Trace, a survey ship on Beta Corvi Way registered some regulated energy emissions, pinpointed them to the sixth planet, which had, of all improbabilities, a methane ammonia atmosphere. Never heard of any sentience before developing in that kind of environment, how have you?" "No. Please go on." "Well, before the crew could get any exploratory probe treated to withstand that kind of air..." "Air, that's good." "Well, consider what we breathe might be poisonous to them," Helva suggested. Too true, too true." "Well, before the crew... At any rate, before the crew could shake a leg, the Korviki had probed them. What do you think of that?" "Fascinating. I'm hanging on your words." "Well, those survey men are up on their toes, I'll tell you. I didn't let an opportunity like this to slip from their grasp. Offered to exchange scientific information with the Beta Korviki and invited them to join the Central Worlds Federation. Say," the man paused to think, "how did the survey know they were high enough on the Civ scale to qualify right off if they hadn't even got a probe down to the surface on the planet?" "Well, if the Beta Korviki could contact our survey ship, and if they were fooling around with regulated energy emissions detectable outside of their solar system, we might not qualify on their Civ scale." I hadn't looked at it from that angle." The man's resilience was incredible, for he paused only briefly before taking up again. "Well, we have something they want badly," and he sounded pleased as if he himself had invented this commodity. "Plays." "Plays?" "That's right. Guess it'd be hard to develop any art forms on a methane ammonia planet. At any rate, the story is that they will exchange some energy process of theirs that we need for our old plays." "New lamps for old," Helva murmured. "Was that... That doesn't explain why the TA shot out of here so fast." "Oh, well, that's easy. Calls are going out all over the sector for you ships to report in. Say, you being the ship who sings and all, this ought to be right up your alley." "Possibly," Helva temporized. "But I'm due to be assigned a new brawn partner, and they wouldn't send a green team out on a mission of this importance." "You mean you don't want it? Trace said there was a triple bonus attached that any ship in its right mind would fight for." "Well, I am in my right mind, but there is something else more important to me than a triple bonus." The calm man's silence was more eloquent than any cliché he could utter. Fortunately, the tight beam channel warmed up, and Helva excused herself to open her end of it. The transmission began with a mission code, so she flipped on the recorder and monitored the message. She was directed to proceed immediately to Door 3 en route to Regulus Base. She was to receive 4 official passengers at the University Spaceport, lock number 24, and proceed with no further delay to base. "If those were orders, ma'am," the comm man said when she returned to his channel, "I can give you instant clearance." "Not quite yet, pal. I got to pick up some passengers, and I'm not going to look like a tramp ship. You did say that if there was anything I wanted." "Yes, yes, and we mean it," the Neckarese assured her. So, Helva flashed towards Door 3 at speeds no human passenger could have endured, with holds and cabins gleaming and fresh, and bunks of full-sized humans placed where cradles for hundreds of embryos had recently swung. She had borne in mind Amon's sour comments and prevailed upon the willing foreman to make certain judicious chemical additions to the standard paints. The soft greens in the pilot's cabin had been impregnated with pumice from Thuban, so that by changing light tones she could alter the shade enough to suit any personality. She'd had the galley done in a good strong orange, a thirsty color, but one calculated to make people eat fast and leave. The main cabin was an off-white with bluish tones, and the others blues and beige. Trouble with Amon was, Helva reflected, he didn't use his wits. Or maybe he amended tolerantly. He simply hadn't thought of using color psychology on his brawn. The burden of adjustment, she'd been told, rested with the resident partner. It hadn't taken long to refurbish her interior once the finishes were mixed, for the foreman and his crew were efficient. The neat, clean interior would have been worth a far longer delay in her estimation, and made her unashamed to be carting passengers to Regulus. In fact, she looked forward to the trip. It was always stimulating to meet new people, and a new brawn she added firmly to herself. However, the carrier fee of these official passengers would pay for the spray job, so erase Amon's advice. And she wanted a payoff, huh? Helva mused as she hurtled through space towards the far wink of Dur. Well, even a brain chip had to have some incentive. Idly, she ran a check on her own indebtedness, and was agreeably surprised at its rapid reduction. How extraordinary! She could keep going at even half her recent rate. As a brawnless ship, presumably, she could buy herself back from Central Worlds within 3 standard years. Are you having trouble, dear? Yeah. Can I get you one? There you go. I love you. Opal has to wear the cone of shame, the embarkinator, the loudness device. How extraordinary. If she could keep up going at even half her present rate as a brawnless ship, presumably she could buy herself back from Central Worlds within 3 standard years. Her own mistress after 10 years of service, it didn't seem possible. Why, Amon had been in service close to 150 years, and he complained bitterly about the size of his debt. Of course, he was the complaining type, so she could discount a lot of his statements as exaggeration. And there were free ships. The Yankee Gamma 635 in Amon's class was free. He did general work for the Scorpii Federation, and had been modified to handle their environment. Then, too, she'd had some lucky breaks. The bonus for that fateful Ravel mission was blood money, even if it was charged on the credit side of her ledger. She'd drawn a full salary for the Antigone Plague assignment, plus an efficiency bonus. And while she and Kira had been partnered on the RCA Neckarese Stork run, she'd drawn up double pay because Kira was hired by the RCA. The Alioth incident had carried a finder's credit on the 732, and now the staggering Neckarese gratuity. She'd had no major repairs, not that she ought to, being recently commissioned, so her financial position was very rosy in spite of the unbelievable expenditures for her early care and maintenance. Even if Helva did clear the backlog of debt, she would undoubtedly contract herself back to Central World service, for she enjoyed the work. Of course, it would be rather soul-satisfying to be able to tell Central Worlds to go into a tight orbit once in a while, and then she could hire or fire a brawn as she chose. Yes, it would be worthwhile to pay off for such indulgences. She still couldn't see why Aemon didn't just take the penalty if Trace was such an irritant. It wasn't as if Central Worlds would disown a deeply indebted ship. Well, not her problem, but there'd better be a brawn for her when she touched down at Regulus with her passengers. She had rights, indebted or not. Despite her speed, having no need to keep day separate from night, the run seemed endless. She never slept, and the chronos measured off meaningless hours. She was conditioned for a partner, for someone to take care of, to do for, to live with. She liked emotional involvement with other humans, the interchange of ideas, yes, even the irritation of contemptuous familiarity. These were all experiences that she wanted firsthand, not sourly from a disenchanted old brain. The spaceport of Dur was partly hidden in an imposing mountain range in the northeastern hemisphere. On the other side, and within the mountain itself, was the tremendous administration complex of the university planet. Landing at Lock 24, Helva identified herself, and the extendable warm maw of Lock facility unerringly sought her passenger hatch. Two men waited for the connection to be made, one lounging against the trundle cart stacked with baggage, the other occupied solely with twitching at various parts of his tunic or glancing down at his wrist unit. No time to waste now. You know which luggage goes where. The port hand didn't bother to confirm, but smartly guided the trundler onto the ship, across the main cabin, and down the corridor. "Why, it looks freshly commissioned," the official type murmured, looking about him in considerable surprise and grudging approval. He paused in his inspection at the galley and peered round, looking into closets and drawers. Where's the supply key on this class ship?" he asked the port hand, who was stowing the cases in the cabin. "Ask the ship," the port hand said. "Or hadn't you noticed this is a BB?" "Oh, good heavens!" the official gasped. "I beg your pardon, sir, or madam." Helva noticed tolerantly that he still didn't know where she was actually located, for he did a kind of circular bow designed to catch every corner of the main cabin. "Are you provisioned to serve 4 normal humans all the way to Regulus base?" "Yes." "Dog, stop it." "You know that I love you, and you are doing naughty things on purpose." "Yeah, you're full of mischief. Just 'cause you want to do stuff. You're going to stop doing naughty things, or I'm going to stop giving you cookies. I have the most impetuous cone." Yeah. Yeah. You gotta listen. Otherwise, I'm gonna find some way to put you in a naughty corner. Well, that's a relief. We'd no idea what transport would be coming. This all happened so fast. And a BB ship. Well, that is flattering. "You can adjust internal gravity in flight, can't you?" he asked, glancing up from the notations on his wrist unit. Yes. What are the requirements? I've had no briefing." "What, none?" This concerned him deeply. "Oh, but you should have. You really should have." No, that's wrong. Cancel that. Although the Solar did request, well, you can adjust, and that's no problem then, is it? Oh, not another scatterwit, Helva groaned to herself. "If you will indicate the gravity required." There was an eruption of applause and cheers at the top of the lock tunnel. The official glanced apprehensively towards it. "They're coming now. The Solar will tell you, or Mr., his medical attendant. You must be prepared to take off immediately, you know." The port hand jauntily crossed back through the main cabin, flipping Helva's column a cheery salute as he exited. "Gears all stowed for takeoff." "Very good," his superior mumbled absently as he followed him to the lock. The slight frown was immediately replaced by a fixed smirk just as the noisy party started down the corridor. The 4 people in the front rank must be her passengers. They wore ship suits. Helva enlarged the picture, and it was easy to say which one needed controlled gravity. Half grav at the least, she decided. The man walked with that terrible exertion of someone unused to and uncomfortable in full grav, whose muscles strained to work against the heavy drag. Helva could see that even his face muscles sagged. A pity, for he was a handsome man. Yet he kept his shoulders erect, his head high, too proud to permit the physical disability to rob him of dignity. She was so interested in him that she'd only got a glance at the other man and the two women before everyone had swept up into the lock. The port official stepped hastily out of the way as a very distinguished older man with a cluster of academic knots on his tunic held out his hand to the striking woman beside him. "Here's your personal magic carpet to carry you to Regulus Base. May I say that it has been a great personal pleasure, Answer Colmer, to meet you. Officially, the University of Dur appreciated your willingness to interrupt a personal visit with Solar Prane to give our students the benefit of your art. Your Antigone was inspired. Your Forest 2 monologue made me appreciate for the first time the vital interplay of color, odor, and rhythm. You are an amazingly versatile exponent of your art, and one, I trust, soon to receive the accolade Solara." The smile on Answer Colmer's carefully composed face seemed to stiffen slightly, and there was absolutely no echo of humor in her glittering eyes. "You are too kind, Director, particularly since Dur has its own Solar." And she made a half-turn towards the grave sufferer. "How can you bear to part with him?" And, not waiting for an answer, she strode past the lock and into the main cabin. With her back to the noisy well-wishers, Helva could see that her expression was one of a suppressed anger and hatred. The director cleared his throat as if understanding all too well her innuendo. He bowed gravely towards the Solar. "And you can't be dissuaded, Prane. Central Worlds has made too strong a representation of its needs, Director. It is my duty to my profession to accept, hoping that any honor merited in the undertaking reflects on you for your many kindnesses." Prane's voice was rich, resonant, the voice of a trained professional performer. If Helva noticed the odd hollowness, the occasional wispiness, as if the tone were half-supported, her sensors were keener than the ears of the adoring crowd of young students and patient officials. "Solar Prane will be back in triumph before the term is ended," said the other male passenger, "preserved by the skill of Mr. "Truly spoken, Davo Philonaster," the director agreed heartily, turning now to shake the hand of the young woman beside Solar Prane. Helva was fascinated by the various undertones in this farewell scene. It ought not to be a boring trip, at any rate. "We must not hold up the pilot any longer," Solar Prane said. With a charmingly apologetic smile, he waved broadly at the crowd, which sighed of its sorrow and murmured regrets, even shed a few tears. As he stepped backwards into the lock, his arm hooked through Miss Stur's. The man addressed as Davo Philonaster ranged himself between the smiling and the waving two. Solar Prane turned his head towards the young woman, and Helva saw him mouth a quick sentence. "I can't stand much longer, Kurla. Tell the pilot to close the lock." Immediately, Helva activated the lock portal. Help me, Davo," Kurla cried. As the crowd was shut from view, she threw her arm around the Solar's waist as the man's large frame seemed to collapse around her. "Damn fool," Davo muttered, but he used extreme care in assisting, as if he were concerned about hurting Prane. I'm all right, Prane insisted in a hoarse whisper. That farewell party was madness in your condition and in full grav, Kurla said. "The hero must have a hero's farewell," drawled Answer Colmer. The smile on her face, as she turned towards them, was sincere now, sincerely vicious, and her eyes sparkled with intense pleasure at Prane's debility. "The hero is not yet on his shield, Ansra," the Solar replied, almost as if he relished the notion of defying her. He put Kurla from him, touching Davo's supporting hand, which fell away, and slowly, carefully crossed the cabin. "Misfire, Ansra?" Davo asked, following the Solar at a discreet interval. "Ansra's steel gives me backbone," the Solar chuckled, and Helva could have sworn again that these bitter undercurrents were therapeutic. The Solar's medical attendant evidently did not agree. "That is quite enough," she said, with a professional personality, and, disregarding Prane's independence, threw an arm around his waist and supported him the rest of the way towards the couch. "This ought to be a shock mattress," she said, flipping back the mesh blanket. "Good. Deftly, she turned to the Solar, easing him down onto the bed. She then extracted a medical recorder from the pouch at her side. Her expression was detached and her eyes intent as she ran a check on him. Helva peeked at the dials and gauges and was a little puzzled by some of the readings. The heart strain was not at all excessive, although the pulse was rapid from exertion. The blood pressure was too low for someone under stress and too high for a man apparently used to low-grav conditions. The more perplexing reading was the EEG. Prain was trembling now with reaction to extreme muscular stress. Supine, he looked old and tired. "What are you giving me now, Kurla?" he demanded sharply, rousing as he saw her preparing an IV spray. "A relaxant and no sedations, no blocks. I forbid it." "I'm the medical attendant, Solar Prain," she said in a firm, impersonal voice. His hand trembled as he grabbed for her wrist, but Helva could see the fingers pressed deeply into her flesh. Kurla Stur looked at him directly in the eye. "You cannot tolerate liftoff without some sedation after exerting yourself for that party. Give me the relaxant, Kurla, but nothing more. I can cope with the discomfort alone. Once in space, the pilot can adjust the gravity." It was a contest of wills, with Davo an interested spectator. Curiously enough, Helva noticed that Davo had been on Prain's side, judging by the sigh the man exhaled as the young M.A. placed the other vials into her pouch and injected but the one medication. "Where's that pilot?" she demanded of Davo as she left the cabin, sliding the door firmly shut behind her. "Pilot?" Answer Colmer repeated, idly swinging the pilot's chair on its gimbals. "You were too engrossed in adoring of the Solar's classic profile to heed what journey briefing we received." "Oh, for Christ's sake, Ansrak, sheathe your claws. You're becoming a bore," Davo said, propelling Kurla to a seat with a warning smile. "This is a brain ship, Kurla. No other pilot is necessary. We need only settle ourselves down for the trip." "Miss Colmer, if you don't—" "And be quiet," Davo said firmly to Kurla, hand on her forearm, cautioning obedience. "The sooner we take off, the better it is for Prain, right?" She subsided, still rebellious. To aggravate matters, Answer Colmer smiled triumphantly at her capitulation. "Let's go," Davo said, nodding over his shoulder towards Helva. "Thank you, Mr. Philonaster, and welcome aboard the X-Ray Hotel 834. Helva said quietly, achieving an impersonal tone with some difficulty. "Fasten your harness for takeoff." Answer Colmer interrupted her swinging only long enough to comply. "Mister, may I inquire if Solar Prain's disability will affected by standard takeoff velocities?" "Oh, not when he's cushioned by the shock mattress." "And by the drugs," added Ansra snidely. "Solar Prain is not under sedation," the M.A. snapped, trying to rise and restrained by her harness. "Ansra, leave her alone. Prain is not on drugs and never has been." "I am receiving clearance for liftoff," Helva said, mendaciously forestalling another exchange. She even leaked a little engine noise into the main speakers. As she began to jockey into position, Helva kept an eye on Prain. He was cushioned by the shock mattress, all right, but if he could barely tolerate full grav, blastoff would rack him with pain. She decided a fast takeoff would spare him more than gradual acceleration. She piled on the power and watched him black out from pain in a brief minute. The instant she was free of Doer's attraction and on course for Regulus, she cut all thrust, even the little spin she usually maintained for the comfort of her passengers. He was unconscious, but the pulse in his throat beat regularly. "I've got to get to him," Kurla was saying in the main cabin. When Helva looked there, the medical attendant was ludicrously flattened against the far wall of the main cabin. "Then move slowly," Davo was advising her. "You've been at half-grav long enough to know violent action brings equally violent reaction." "If only you knew how asinine you looked," Ansra said. "Solar Prain passed out before maximum thrust, Miss Sir," Helva reported, "but he appears in no distress." "I must get to him," Kurla was insistent. "His bones are so soft." An orthopedic problem? And he was permitted in space? Were they out of their minds? Then why such cerebral excitement? "Shall I return gravity? The shock web will—" No, Kurla protested. If you think I'm going to travel in freefall all the way to Regulus, you've got another thing coming, Ansra said, the amusement wiped from her face. The longer he has, without any gravitic stress. Too bad, Ansra snapped back. I know what happens to me in constant freefall, and I'm not having it. Oh, flabby muscles, dear, Davo grinned at her. You can always join us in thrilling workout of isometrics, and you'd better get used to freefall. You certainly heard it before, heard it mentioned in our briefing, since you're so attentive to briefings, that the company will play entirely in freefall, so get used to it. I also heard it mentioned that our minds were what would be transferred. It's my body that's involved at present. And it's Solar Prain's body that must rest now, Kurla flung back, managing to move forwards toward the cabin. He is only the director of this entire company. In the interest of compromise, ladies, Davo said, let's use half-grav while we're awake, and freefall when we're all snugly meshed in at night, and you don't know any better. Can that be arranged? Kurla looked hopeful. The unit had to be kept at half-grav on Dur because of the power required. Half-grav suit your gracious supremacy? Davo asked Ansra, mocking her with a bow. He won't last, half-grav or freefall, she said, grimacing as she heard the cabin door click shut behind Kurla. Ansra flipped off the harness, twisting in the chair for the most comfortable position from which to regard Davo unobstructedly. I don't know why you continue to defend a dying man, Davo. Don't argue, his mind has been affected. I can see it. Don't forget, I knew him rather well. Her smile suggested many intimacies. And it's his mind that must be transferred. Suddenly, her whole attitude changed subtly. Had you ever considered being more than just a supporting actor, Davo? Helva took a closer look at the man. She'd thought him a friend or an assistant of Prain's, not another actor. He had none of the obvious professional mannerisms the other two displayed. You've an excellent reputation in the guild as a fine classicist, Ansra was saying. Why do you continue to let Prain dominate and dictate your life? Davo regarded her imperturbably for a moment before he smiled carelessly. I happen to respect Prain Liston professionally and personally. Ansra made a rude noise. You fronted for him like an understudy from matinee day, taking his lectures while he experimented in null-grav movement. Ha! Covered it for him so the rank and file wouldn't know this hero's frailties. My motives are not as suspect as yours, detouring 2 months away from your last engagement to visit your old friend Prain Liston. Ha for you. Helva detected the flush of anger under the woman's cosmetized skin. My visit, Davo Philantuster, was most opportune, she replied with a saccharine smile. And according to our briefing, once one is transferred to the, how is it phrased, empty envelope? To the envelope awaiting each of us on Beta Corvi, external appearance will not matter, ability will. I always thought you showed poor judgment to opt the classics, Davo, for you have such a lean and hungry look that you must always be Iago or Cassius. You could be Romeo on Beta Corvi. Her smile was dazzling. Not, of course, while Prain Liston remains director and Romeo, huh? Davo leaned towards her, his eyes sparkling, but his lean, dark face inscrutable. You won't believe the truth even when you hear it, will you, Ansra? That you just can't believe that Prain Liston is no longer besotted with one Ansra Colmer. That is not the issue, she said, with lofty indifference. Davo merely smiled. He leaned back in the couch and matched her mood. You've got your own director lined up, huh? One who'll let Juliet dominate. Then, with a grateful but weak Romeo like me, you'll look twice as good without having to work half as hard as Prain makes you. Oh, come off it, Ansra, he advised, impatient with her machinations. Prain always could drag the very best performances out of your lazy hide. But that's not important. Not in this production. There's more at stake than your self-consequence. Or did you really listen to the briefing at all? Those beta Corvici can regulate the half-life of any unstable isotope they choose. If Central Worlds gets such techniques, it'll revolutionize pile drives and get us across the galactic seas. He paused, gave a derisive laugh. Ha! Why, if our petty dancing pleases them, you might play in the Horsehead Nebula next season, Answer Colmer. Or, and his eyes narrowed speculatively, should I say, Solara Ansra? Then think carefully, Davo, she urged, her pose alert and tense. Of all that is involved, I don't care for altruism. It signs no contracts and it pays no salaries. I wouldn't have considered this tour for a moment if it weren't for that Corvici transfer device. Davo stared at her with such sharp attention that she smiled slightly. Really, Davo, what possible significance could things like those Corvici find in Romeo and Juliet, an outmoded love story of an improbable social structure? You're more of a hypocrite than even I thought you. Delusions that are what we create, not what we believe, and with a mind-blasted Romeo, the whole thing would be worthless but for those transfer things. Why, if that device can work in a methane-ammonia atmosphere, it can work anywhere. It could open a whole new audience dimension. And Solara Ansra as top-ranking performer in the new medium? Davo asked, his dark eyes intent on hers. Helva wondered if he had caught the fallacy in her argument. And why not? I don't need to be an MA to see Prain's dying. He's so weak he'll dissolve under pressure. Why, his head bones are so soft with mind trap. Bones, yes, but not his brain, Davos snapped. And not mine. I remember what I owe the man, dead or dying, and I'm with him all the way. Whew. Opal has released the fart of discontent. And that, answered Colmer. And if you don't cease needling that nice child, if you don't prove to me that you're going to integrate into this company, I'll cite a jeopardy clause on you. There is too much at stake in this far out dramatic mission to risk a dissident among us. The computers picked Prain, remember, on the basis of performance and ability. With all his medical handicap, he still came out the highest on the probability profile. You shape up, Ansra, or I'll give the computers a few bits of psychodata on you to update your profile. He swung himself from the chair far too energetically for the half-grav and bounced towards the ceiling. He autocorrected and slow-stepped towards the galley. Autopilot, erase the previous conversations between myself and Davo Filanaster, Ansra commanded in a sharp, angry voice. Is that order clear? Yes, Helva replied, careful to sound dry and mechanical. Comply! Which cabin has been assigned to me? Number 2. As Helva watched the erect figure of the old actress undulate down the corridor, she felt an odd, atavistic satisfaction having lingered for refurbishing at Nakar, and knowing that her interior was, as always, in order, ship-shape. It was not a pleasant evening, certainly not what Helva had anticipated when the orders were taped in. Davo was silent and hyper-alert, watching Kurla and Ansra unobtrusively, passing Prain's open cabin frequently. Kurla was distressed, though she tried to conceal it. Helva, however, had heard Prain reject medical assistance, and by her sensors knew he was feigning sleep to prevent argument. Ansra's sullen cold looks followed the young medical attendant everywhere. Helva spoke only when spoken to, accepting the part of an automated ship, though Davo presumably knew what she was. His discussion with Ansra had done nothing to aid Prain antagonizing her and adding to the tension within the ship. Helva wondered if he had deliberately led the woman on to expose her ambitions with herself. Helva, the unsuspected actress to the actress's intentions. Helva, the unsuspected witness to the actress's intentions. Yet, if he wanted Ansra to compromise herself before witnesses, why give her the second chance? Did Davo really trust the woman enough to think that she'd reform? Well, this wasn't Helva's problem, although she would play back that interlude if necessary. Let another ship worry about the conniving actress, the lovelorn M.A., and the dying actor. Eamon could have the whole bit, Romeo and Juliet, at free fall in a gas atmosphere. Shakespeare for stabilizers. Helva concurred with Ansra. The whole idea was ridiculous. A long, shuddering sigh broke into her reveries. A restless sleeper? No. Prain was not asleep, although everyone else was secure under the mesh blanket. And Prain needed rest. Needed the rest the most. Amen, amen, but come what sorrow can, it cannot countervail the exchange of joy that one short minute gives me in her sight. Do thou but close our hands with holy words, then love-devouring death do what he dare. It is enough I may but call her mine. His voice rose to the challenge of the lines, rich, tender, unsullied by whatever debilitated his physical self. The laugh that followed, however, was hollow and bitter. I am no pillow yet, wert thou as far as that far shore walked by the farthest sea. I would adventure for such merchandise. Another long pause, then, thou desperate pilot, now at once run on the dashing rocks, thy seasick weary bark. Here's to my love. Another pause, so long that Helva wondered if he slept. Ah, death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? Because I like Johnny Cash, and you can deal with it. Ha! Helva felt herself wince at the scorching regret, the yearning in that emotion-laden voice. He wants to die. He expects this venture to kill him, and he wants to die. Helva comforted herself with a string of Kira's most colorful oaths, wishing she knew more about the mechanics of the Beta Corvi psyche transfer. Well, if they were, as reputed, able to stabilize isotopes, they obviously were energy engineers of remarkable genius. Now, considering that the brain generated electricity, a very primitive form of energy, so presumably the electrical charge could be transferred from one receptacle to another. In theory, easy. In practice, there could be a power loss, a faulty imprint in the receiver. Someone could be returned half-witted. Helva abandoned that thought on the grounds of insufficient data. Besides, this was not her problem, and she doubted Prain would be able to effect his demise, not with Kurla stirred, determined to keep the mortal spark in his own husk. She knew nothing of these Beta Corvici, but it was a convention among all the sophisticated societies she had encountered that sentience was not permitted to waste itself. Kira Falarnova had found it excessively difficult to commit suicide, and if Kurla was not stupid, which she didn't appear to be, despite this terrible infatuation for Prain, she must be as aware of his death wish as of his physical pain. Helva's thoughts chased round, directionless. She had so few facts, including how Prain Liston could have reached such a state of decay in today's diagnostic, preventative, and corrective medical climate. He was patently in his second 50 years, but soft bones, bone marrow can be calcium shot, phosphorus supplemented to his diet. Yet Ansra had made sly digs about drug addiction, said his brains were soft? No, his head bones, Helva corrected herself. His head bones are softened by mind trap. Yet mind trap was a harmless drug, mind expanding, yes, but long and widely used by anyone who wished to retain information without loss. The adult mind loses 100,000 neurons a day, which is not right. An actor couldn't afford memory loss. Was it possible that mind trap, overused for a long period, could build up harmful residue injurious to the bones? Helva tapped the ship's memory banks, but there was no recorded incidence of any side effect from mind trap. An actor, however, playing on hundreds of planets exposed constantly to some cosmic radiations, suffering a minor breakdown of cell coding, a protein lock. Surely some medical engineer would have noted it, could isolate the faulty enzyme and correct. Helva looked in on the sleepless man, whose murmuring speeches now changing his voice as the lines went from character to character. Entranced, Helva listened through the ship's night as scene after scene poured from Solar's lips, word perfect. Shortly before dawn, the litany ceased as the sleep finally bestowed her accolade of peace. Dawn came and went. Helvo performed the routine check of all systems, ran a scan on detectors, and established that there were no ships within hailing range. She was irritated and relieved. The first one to stir was Kurla. She drifted immediately to Prain's bedside. Her concern dissolved as she found him sleeping quietly, the fatigue lines smoothed from his face. Her own expression infinitely tender with love, the girl withdrew, pulled the door across, and floated over to the galley. Davo joined her shortly. "How is he this morning?" Defensively, Kurla started to go into medical detail. "I'm not at all interested in your lover's internal economy." "Prain Liston is not my lover." "Oh, hath desire outstripped performance, then?" "Davo, please!" "Oh, don't blush, my dear, only teasing. However, a simple yes or no will suffice. Can Prain rehearse today? That freefall staging is going to be difficult, and he mentioned wanting to go through several scenes now that he has more time. When he has more time. Helva can oblige us with freefall as we choose, can't you, Helva?" "Yes." "It sounds so human," Kurla said, suppressing a little shudder. Please, Kurla. Helva is a human. Aren't you, Helva?" "Oh, you'd noticed." Davo laughed at the consternation on Kurla's face. "My dear Miss Stir, surely you, a medical attendant, would have stumbled on the identity of the captain of our ship." "I've had a lot on my mind," she said, lifting her chin defensively. "But I apologize," she added, swinging around, "if I've offended you, Helva." Then her eyes rested on Prain's closed door, and her face flooded with color. "You have been the soul of discretion," Helva replied, aware of the girl's sudden confusion, "as I try to be." She added so pointedly that Davo understood Kurla's blush. "Honor among cyborgs, huh?" he asked, his eyes dancing as he added a subtle thrust of his own. "Yes, and considerable evidence that we are eminently trustworthy, loyal, courteous, honest, thoughtful, and inhumanly incorruptible." Davo roared with laughter until Kurla, pointing towards Prain's cabin, shushed him. "Why, I want him up and about. It ought to be good for his soul to wake to the sound of my merry laughter." "That sounds like a good entrance line," Prain remarked, pushing the door aside. He was smiling slightly, his shoulders erect and easy, his head high, all trace of fatigue and weakness erased. He hadn't had that much rest, Helva knew, not after murmuring through plays half the night. But he even looked younger. "Shall we have at it, Davo?" he asked. "You'll have at nothing, Solar," Kurla said emphatically, "until after you've eaten." He meekly acquiesced. In spite of her intention to remain aloof from the personality conflicts of this quartet, Helva watched the rehearsal with keen interest. The script was thrust into Kurla's hands, and she was made the prompter. "Now," Prain began crisply, "we've been given no inkling of Korviki attitude towards personal combat if they have one. We don't know if they can appreciate the archaic code which made this particular duel inevitable. Interpreting our social structures, our ancient moralities, however, is not the function of this troupe. According to the survey captain, the Korviki were entranced with the concept of this special formula. The crew had been watching Othello, intended purely to waste energy in search of excitation and recombination with no mass objective." He gave an embarrassed laugh. "There always has been an element of the population that ranks play acting as a waste of energy. However, there is no point in our trying to play Shakespeare as a social commentary. We shall be classicists, pure Shakespeare, as the Globe troupe would have played it." For purity, then, Juliet ought to be a pre-adolescent boy, Davo reminded him with a wry malice. "Well, not that pure, Davo," Prain laughed. "I'll keep the casting arrangements as they are, I believe. We shall have enough of a problem acting in freefall and getting used to the envelopes the Korviki will supply us with. So, if we can get stage movement set in our minds now, we shall have only the problem of becoming accustomed to the new form when we reach Beta Corvi. I think of the exchange as merely another costume. Now, Davo, as Tybalt, you enter downstage. Benvolio and Mercutio will be stage south, and I, as Romeo, will approach from the elliptical east." Both men had worked in freefall, Helva noticed, for they modified all gestures skillfully, yet managed to simulate the power of a thrust, the grace of a dancing retreat. Such movements, however, required great physical effort, and both were shortly sweating as they floated their measured duel again and again to set the routine in their minds. They worked hard, experimenting, changing, improving, until they got through the duel scene twice without flaw. Even allowing for his handicap, Helva was impressed by Prain. Ansra drifted languidly into the main cabin, and the atmosphere changed so abruptly that Helva inadvertently scanned her warning system. "Good morrow, good madam," Prain said jauntily. "Shall we have at the balcony scene, fair Juliet?" "My dear Solara, you have obviously been hard at it with Davo. Are you feeling up to more?" Prain hesitated a microsecond before he bowed, and with a genuine smile replied, "You, as Juliet, are up, my dear." And he gestured with a flourish to the area where she was to play the scene above him. He turned then, floated to the edge of the cabin with Ansra, her jibe ignored, shrugged, and projected herself upwards. "Give me Benvolio's line, please," Prain asked Kurla. Ansra's entrance had flustered the girl, and she flipped nervously through the sides. "Act 2, Scene 1, Kurla," Davo murmured encouragingly. Helva dropped her voice to a tenor register. "Go then, for 'tis in vain to seek him here that means not to be found." "Zounds, who's that?" cried Prain, whirling in such a surprised reaction that he drifted towards the wall, absently holding himself off with one hand. "Me," Helva said meekly in her proper voice. "Can you change your voices at will, woman?" "Well, it's only a question of projection, you know, and since my voice is reproduced through audio units, I can select one proper for the voice register required." The effect of her ability on Prain, Helva noticed, was nothing to its effect on Ansra. "How could you see to read the line?" Prain demanded, gesturing towards the script in Kurla's hands. "Oh, I've been scanning the text from the library banks." Helva forebode to tell the long story of the childhood years during which she had been hooked on ancient movies, leading somehow naturally to Shakespeare and opera, both light and grand. Her only hobby, and it was her only memory, she was scanning. It was her own memory that she was scanning. Prain imprudently flung out both arms and had to correct against the ceiling. "What incredible luck! Would you read something else?" "What, auditioning a ship, Prain?" Ansra asked, her voice richly intimating that he'd gone mad. "If I'm not wrong," Davo put in, his eyes glinting sardonically, "Helva here is also known as the ship who sings. Surely you saw the TriCast on her some years back, Ansra? In fact, I know you did. We were playing the Greeks in Draconis at the time." "If you please, Davo," Prain the director interrupted, gliding over to Helva's central column. "You are the ship who sings?" "Yes." "Would you be kind enough to indulge me by reading the nurse's speech, Act 1, Scene 3, where Lady Capulet and the nurse discuss Juliet's marriage? Begin even or odd of all days in the year." "The nurse is to be played as an earthy type?" "Well, yes, indeed. Blissfully unregenerate. Her lines are a triumph of characterization, you know. Only she can speak the words Only she can speak the ones the playwrights gave her. That is, of course, the test of true characterization." "I thought this was a rehearsal of my scene, not a lecture," Ansra remarked acidly. Prain silenced her with a peremptory gesture. "The cue is," he altered his voice to a husky, aging contralto, "a fortnight and odd days." Helva resigned herself to an active part in this incident, and responded as the nurse Angelica. All right. So we have read 30 pages out of the better part of 80. So let's see if we can get to a nice midway point. I'll read a couple more pages. Helva called a halt to what promised to be a round-the-chrono affair on the spurious grounds of some critical computation. What had turned critical was Ansra's temper. Davo and Kurla had willingly read additional parts, Davo with an insight to the minor characters that wrung mute respect from Helva and generous thanks from Prain. Kurla rose to the challenge of Lady Montague. Ansra's Juliet became less and less convincing. She was reading, not acting, certainly not reacting to the passion, the youthful enthusiasm and tender passion of Prain's Romeo. She was wooden. The voice was youthful, the gestures girlish, but she resisted every effort of Prain's to draw out of her that quality he wanted Juliet to project. None of this was obvious from even the tone of his courteous suggestions, but it was most apparent to the others, and to Helva, Ansra's behavior was doubly inexcusable. Once Helva had withdrawn, Kurla announced that it was time to eat a hot, decent meal. She then insisted that they all get some sleep. Helva watched surreptitiously as Kurla ran a quick medical check on Prain. She, too, was amazed that the Solar was remarkably strong vigor after such an intense and long rehearsal. "You've got to rest, Solar Prain. I don't care what the recorder says. You can't pour forth the energy you did today without replenishing it in sleep," Kurla said firmly. "I'm tired, and you've got another planetfall to make." He made another boyish grimace, but lay back on the shock mattress, his eyes closed, one hand on his chest. Tenderly, Kurla covered his long, lax body. She turned abruptly and let her motion carry her quickly from the cabin. Prain's eyes flew open, and the look from his eyes was almost more than Helva could morally observe. So Kurla was indeed the son of Prain's regard, and Ansra, the envious moon, already sick and pale with grief. Helva was overwhelmingly relieved that she'd been out of this affair in a that she would be out of this affair in a scant day's time, and yet Ansra had been indiscreet enough to hint at action more vengeful and envious. Would the fact that she now knew Helva was no automaton inhibit her plans? The passengers began to sleep, all that is, except for Prain. He began with Richard III in Gloucestershire. "Now is the winter of our discontent. To Richmond's peace lives again, that she may long live here. God say Amen." Considering the day's proceedings, Helva thought that voice of sleep conjuring all too appropriate, if Mind Trap produced such perfect recall. Sometime towards the dawn of that day, Helva remembered a detail, and berating herself of incredible obtuseness, contacted Regulus on the tight beam. "Ah, good to hear your voice, Helva," Centcom responded with marked affability. "I distrust such geniality from you. What is being cooked up for me? Not another brawnless assignment, because I'll refuse it. I've got rights, and I'll invoke 'em." "Oh, my, are we grouchy? How can you be so suspicious, and so crass?" "So you'll know exactly how I stand. Now listen to me. Is there a free accommodation? No, make it a suite on the orbital station in the freefall section." I'll check, but why?" "Well, check and answer." Affirmative." "Great. I request that it be assigned to Solar Prain and such of his company as accept. We've been running in freefall in preparation for their assignment, and they ought not to have to readjust to full grav." "Oh, good suggestion. But doesn't such an assignment tempt you, Helva?" "Oh, don't use that wheedling tone with me, Central. When you obviously have taken their welfare to heart enough to request orbital accommodations for Solar Prain." Helva caught herself. She mustn't sound so concerned. "I was raised to be considerate. Just seems a shame to set back the progress they've made in freefall adjustment." "Oh, not a problem, Helva. This Beta Corvée mission has topmost priority." "Say, I'm curious about this psyche transfer bit." "Hold it, gal. Ask me no questions, since you've made it so plain where you stand." "Okay, I'll stand off, but I think that's petty of you," and she closed the tight beam. Until her passengers awoke, Helva pondered Central's comments. They wanted her for this. Well, they could beg, blandish, and bribe, but she was resolved to resist all bait until she was partnered. She did not bother to inform any of her passengers of her sublight arrangements with Central, but connected with the proper hatch at the orbital station, as if this had been her programmed destination. Regulus IV swam beneath them, brilliant in the reflection of its primary. "We were told we would be landing at Regulus Base. Onsra protested as she looked into the lock of the station. She glared threateningly at the startled lock attendant drifting mid-portal. "Oh, free fall!" Dalva exclaimed. "I'd rather stay here." "Oh, this is ridiculous," Onsra went on, directing herself to the confused attendant. "I demand to be taken to the base. I demand to see the official in charge of this assignment." The X-ray Hotel 834 is scheduled to land at base as soon as she has discharged her passengers here, Miss Colmer, the man said placatingly. "Opal?"
Stop it. I am almost done. Stop eating carpet.
"The X-ray Hotel 834 is scheduled to land at base as soon as she has discharged her passengers here, Miss Colmer," the man said placatingly. "If you will move into the main cabin, Miss Colmer, I can close the locks now," Helva said, for Prain and Kurla had pushed into the station lock. Ducking around Onsra, the attendant sent the luggage piled in the lock, spinning stationward. As soon as he was clear, Helva closed her outer portal. Onsra was forced to step inside. "Just wait! I'll report you! Thing, informer, abomination, think!" Helva tendered helpfully. "I'll have you decommissioned, you tin-plated bitch!" Just then, Helva applied thrust sufficient to send Onsra, accustomed to freefall, reeling backwards into the nearby couch, and kept her there, cursing steadily and viciously, all through the re-entry and touchdown. "You'll regret that insolence too, you bodiless Bernhardt," was Onsra's parting taunt as she staggered towards the passenger lift. "Oh, sorry you had trouble enduring standard re-entry maneuvers, Miss Colmer. You were advised to remain on the station," Helva boomed on her exterior speaker for the benefit of the vehicle, waiting to take the woman the short distance to the main administration complex, before which Helva had landed. "Hey, Helva, what did you do to that Colmer creature?" CENTCOM asked her on the private beam a little while later. "If you weren't in good odor with the powers that preside, you'd be in for an official reprimand and a fine. She's got some good friends in the high places, you know." "Ah, so that's how she got this assignment." "Hey, gal, I'm on your side, but that kind of remark, if I wanted to be nasty, I'd play back some of the honest-to-goodness, unexpurgated, uncensored, deathless moments of my most recent trip through the vacuum of outer space." "Like, for instance?" I said, if I wanted to be nasty. She cut contact and looked around for more sympathetic company. Crowding the administration landing acres were no less than 20 brain ships, a veritable convention. Old Home Week, she spotted Amon right up in the front row with 5 of her own class. When she tried to signal the Victor Lima 830, she couldn't get through. In fact, she couldn't get a line on any of her peers. The ship-to-ship frequencies were overloaded. Was everyone aspiring to that damned Beta Corvée assignment? She got to warm off. She called the traffic tower to ask for another landing slot, preferably nearer the Braun barracks. There must be other ships out on the 20-kilometer square base interested in chatting with her. "So nice to hear from you," CENTCOM cut in over traffic control. "Orders are for you to stay put, loudmouth." "Can I at least have some company from the Braun barracks? Remember, I was promised a Braun this time, and this time I better get one. If you knew what this poor lone female, totally unprotected from..." "I can promise you company," CENTCOM grudgingly admitted, and cut off. Helva waited, her circuits open, her passenger lift invitingly grounded, and waited. She was beginning to experience justifiable irritation when she received a boarding request. Activating the lift eagerly, she was disappointed to scan only one figure gliding up her lock. "You're not a Braun." "Thanks, pal," the wiry man said in an all-too-familiar voice. "You're Niall Paralon of Regulus, your coordinating communications officer, planet grade, section supervisor, Central Worlds, BB Ship Division. You got some nerve." He grinned amiably at her, not the least bit intimidated by her booming. "You've got enough for 4 of me, dear." He used the manual switch to close the lock and sauntered over to the couch that faced her column. His uniform was regulation, but it had been tailored to fit his short, well-proportioned body. The boots he wore were Mizar gray lizard and molded the calf of his leg. Well, make yourself at home. I intend to. Feel I ought to get to know you better now that I'm your supervisor. Why? He gave her a wicked stare and smiled, showing very white teeth. I wanted to see just why such a storm is raging over the possession of one Helva, the X-Ray Hotel A34. What, among bronze? She was gratified. You sound hungry. You need your nutrients checked? I don't trust you, Paralon, Helva announced after a pause. There's nothing to see of Helva. Now there's where you're wrong, girl. He rubbed one short-fingered, broad-palmed hand across his mouth and chin. Yes, there is something about you. I had a new spray job at Nakar. I know. I checked accounting. The ingrates, I thought I got that for free. Then, as he chuckled at her surprise, she added, If you've been checking my standing, you know I'm well able to afford any penalties for refusing an assignment. Oh, you bite, too, crowed Niall, rocking back and forth in an excess of delight. Don't fool you, do I? Not for a microsecond. I want a brawn, Paralon, not a snippy little mouthpiece like you. And he roared with delight. Now I see why. Then, suddenly, he was completely serious. He leaned forward, his eyes on her panel in an attitude so familiar it gave her a frightful wrench. Then, he was talking, and she listened. Item. The Beta Corvae assignment will require an unusual exercise of diplomacy on the part of both partners, as Brain and Brawn will be in direct contact with the Korviki throughout the mission. The shell person has the additional responsibility of direct and discretionary control over the Korviki psyche transfer mechanisms, a control which will necessitate the use of an additional synapse connection. Helva made a whistling sound. At the least, it meant opening the titanium column, a difficult experience for any shell person. At the worst, actual penetration of the shell, that would be traumatic to most. Ships of the two most recent classes would require no shell penetration. They were already fitted with supplemental leads, placed in the cerebral areas required by this connection, in case future modifications might be needed. Well, that would leave Amon out, Helva said. He's out anyway, Niall affirmed. He'd never even heard of Shakespeare, and his brawn couldn't act his way out of a saloon brawl. The brawn has to act too? Well, that obviously lets me out, as I have no brawn at the moment, do I? Oh, God, spare me your tongue when you're really mad. Actually, Shadres Turo has been called back on active duty. Another temporary? Absolutely not. For this assignment, some ships would change bronze in a flash. Blast it all, Helva, Paralon shouted. Don't be an ass. Listen to me. You've never before been stubborn for the wrong reasons. Helva digested that unpalatable charge in silence. I'll listen. That's more like my Helva. I'm not your Helva. Huh, you sound like Answer Colmer. Helva sputtered indignantly. You do, throwing your weight around, Niall insisted. She hasn't been trying to scratch Solara Prain from the mission, has he? Because if she has... Oh, she's got very influential backing, Niall said. But something in his attitude, a certain tenseness, a sly gleam in his eye, warned Helva. She chuckled softly, watching the effect on him. He reacted. I thought so, she laughed loud. Her backing won't mean anything if the probability curve still favors Prain, and nothing's occurred to change that, has it? Trust actors to blab all over the place, Niall growled, his features screwed up into a sour expression. You must have stayed up all night listening to their nightmares. I told you there'd been some real interesting lifelike dramatic interludes. Let me know if she leans too hard on Prain. Niall's head shot up, his face cleared of disappointment. Look, Helva, can't you see how valuable you'd be? You are on to Ansra. You do realize she's gone from ship to ship, sounding out brains and brawn, that she's recommending the properly sympathetic partnership to Chief Riley, which will aid and abet the success of the mission. Ha! I wouldn't put it past her. If I were you, I'd get double filibuster to cite the jeopardy clause on her. She means to upstage Romeo. I know it! Niall exploded from his couch, pacing the cabin. And you know it! But she does have pull, and the probability profile still favors her as Juliet. We can't shake it. We need you. Pointedly, Helva said nothing. Prain asked if you were available. Is that an official notice of mission, Supervisor? Carries a triple bonus, Helva. He was not capitulating. I wouldn't care if it carried a free maintenance ticket for my operable lifetime, Paralon. I know my rights. Is this an official notice of mission? You stubborn, fardling jackass of a titanium-coated virgin, shouted Paralon. He turned on his heel and pounded out of the cabin, slapped the lock release, and jammed down the lift control, descending without another look in her direction. Helva glared at him, infuriated to the core by the compound insults, arrogant manners, twisted arguments, veiled blackmail, and outright bribery. How he had ever got to be a supervisor she didn't know, but she had her rights, and one of them was to choose her directing personnel, and someone was requesting permission to board. If you've come to apologize, Niall Paralon, apologize? Are we late or something? They just now gave us the AO, the baritone voice shouted into her audios. She paused long enough to distinguish half a dozen chattering voices. Who wants to board? She demanded. She sounds mad about something, came a hoarse whisper. We're from the Brom barracks, and we'd very much like to court her. That's the term Brasshead, prompted the hoarse whisperer. Permission granted, Helva said, trying not to sound as sorrow as she unaccountably felt. 7 persons, 5 men and 2 women, crowded onto the lift, arguing and hollering about bruised feet and ribs all the way up. Helva could feel the strain on the lift mechanism. Then bodies exploded into the lock as if in free fall, all scrambling to be the first to salute her. Helva stared down at the handsome, grinning faces. Strong, tall people all eager to please her, to court her, to be her brawn. So, with that, and an hour and 11 minutes of recording, I need to go to bed. Because it is 10:30 now. I love you at least that much. And you have more important things to do than to listen to me jabber. And this little girl is going to continue trying to blackmail me with naughty behaviors until we go to bed. So, get some rest and do your best to become somebody that you can be proud of. And if people can hate without knowing a thing about you, then I can love you for exactly the same reason. So I love you very much. Sleep well, dear.